In my previous video on this subject, No Schism to be Found, I covered the issue of those who accuse Sedevacantists of schism, and how they violate church teaching by doing so. Another question of schism has come up regarding the attitudes held by those in the Vatican II sect who claim to be, quote, staying and fighting for their church. This question comes from those who are, quote, standing in the storm. Some of them are in recognize and resist groups, such as the SSPX. Some are not, but still claim that certain magisterial teachings are not binding or are subject to be ignored by the laity. The best question to ask is not what they are fighting for, or even what they are fighting against. The question we must ask them is whom they are fighting against. Who are the culprits involved in doing the damage that they are staying to fight against? Whether it's Chris Ferrara, Michael Matt, Taylor Marshall, or anyone else who advocates for staying and fighting, with or without identifying the specific target, there is a problem with them and their fans accusing Sedevacantists of schism. Schism is a grave sin. Let's look at a definition of schism accepted by all Catholics, Sedevacantists or otherwise. In the Baltimore Catechism, number 3, chapter 30, question 1170, we see that the different classes of unbelievers are, and it gives a list of different unbelievers. Number 6 is schismatics, who have been baptized and believe all the articles of faith, but do not submit to the authority of the Pope. Now let's look at the JP2 Catechism of the Catholic Church definition of schism. Question 2089 says, schism is the refusal of submission to the Roman pontiff or of communion with the members of the church subject to him. Question 1857. JP2's Catechism states, for a sin to be mortal, 3 conditions must be met. They must be met together. Mortal sin is sin whose object is grave matter, which schism would be, and which is also committed with full knowledge and deliberate consent. Since members of the church are also included in his definition of schism, let's look at who members of the church are. In his encyclical Mystici Corporis Christi, Pope Pius XII wrote, actually, only those are to be included as members of the church who have been baptized and profess the true faith. Later he says, for not every sin, however grave it may be, is such as by its very own nature to sever a man from the body of the church as does schism, heresy, or apostasy. While these men are baptized, claimants to episcopal chairs and claimants to the Holy See, claimants to the papacy, while they're baptized, there are many times that they have been proven not to profess the true faith, whether it's endorsing the heresies of Protestantism in the Eastern Court Orthodox, claiming that there are other paths to salvation. And I mean, here's a great example with, quote, Bishop Robert Barron. Speaking to Ben Shapiro, who is a Jew, Ben Shapiro asked him, well, am I screwed, Bishop, being a Jew? And he said, no, the Catholic view. Go back to the Second Vatican Council. It just says very clearly, Christ is the privileged route to salvation. God so loved the world that he gave his only son that we might find eternal life. So that's the privileged route. However, Vatican II clearly teaches that someone outside the explicit Christian faith can be saved. So much for Christ saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh to the Father but by me. This is just one example of these men not professing the true faith. There are many others and many other videos that others have done, and some in my material as well. But anyone who wants to find these heresies or professions of a different faith can do so very easily. So Sedevacantists do not believe these men to be members of the Church of Christ and do not believe that they hold office in the Church of Christ, which is something that was explained in part 1 of No Schism to be Found. You can also find much information on it elsewhere. The reason that we don't believe that they are members of the church or that they validly hold office in the church is due to their profession of a new and different faith and their doubtful ordinations and episcopal consecrations according to Apostolici Curiae and Sacramentum Ordinis. Now, whether Sedevacantists are right or wrong in taking this position is a separate issue from whether they can be called schismatic by members of the Vatican II sect. Again, as in part 1, No Schism to be Found, an important point comes up from Warrens Vidal, or Vens Vidal, which is corroborated by and supported by paragraph 7 of Cum Ex Apostolatus Officio and the inserted constitution of Pope Julius II, the Fifth Lateran Council. For the sake of time on this video, you can pause it if you would like to read them. So Sedevacantists do not believe that bishops and popes teach public heresy because they do not believe them to be true popes or bishops. Those opposed to the Sedevacantist position Some of them do believe that the bishops and popes teach public heresy, because they do believe them to be true popes and bishops and recognize some of their teachings as heretical. But the ones who do not believe that these men teach public heresy have nothing to resist, reject, or disobey, so this doesn't necessarily apply to them. In fact, most of them would not call Sedevacantists schismatic if they did not believe that this was a very pressing issue. Some of them don't at all. Now, for Sedevacantists, there is also no knowledge of a grave sin here. Because while Sedevacantists do understand that schism is grave matter, as is the case with the Eastern Court Orthodox, whom, unlike the Vatican II sect, we do not have interfaith worship with, we do not consider to be part of the Church of Christ, we do not have intercommunion with. Unlike those schismatics, we do not believe that we are engaging in schism, because none of us believe that we are refusing submission to a Roman pontiff or his bishops who were successors to the apostles, or those in communion with him. There is no consent of the will involved because there was no decision made to resist a valid pope or bishop. Now, for those opposed to the Sedevacantists, those who resist and disobey or fight, many of them believe that they are fighting and refusing submission to a pontiff and his bishops. They have knowledge. They also provide consent of the will by deciding to do this. And this is a hard decision for some of them to make, because it legitimately gets into disobeying legitimate spiritual and clerical authorities. That does require a hard decision and consent of the will. But to claim that this is what Sedevacantists do is projection, as is the case with the accusation that we believe the gates of hell have prevailed. I covered that in my video, The Gates of Hell. So for more information, see my video, The Gates of Hell. In summary, those who defend the validity as members of the church and leaders of the church, brilliant theologians and priests who were also notorious idolaters, public apostates, and heretics, those who make excuses for them by saying it was only material heresy, such as this man, or claiming that by some technicality it didn't sever them from the body, or saying that a council needed to make a declaration because the first see is somehow judged by someone, such as a council, even though canon law says the first see is judged by no one in both 1917 and 1983, or those who argued that these men couldn't be expected to know or follow the first commandment, claiming that these men were completely unfamiliar with core dogmas of the faith, etc. And for more information on the most notorious of these men being allowed to get away with murder, so to speak, see my video, Habemus Papam Roach. If these men get this many excuses and this amount of slack, and we can show from your own catechism that conditions must be met for Sedevacantists to be guilty of the schism you accuse us of, and we clearly do not meet these conditions, then perhaps more honesty is required in your approach to ecclesiastical matters. If these men aren't heretics or apostates, but were allegedly schismatics, despite having no knowledge of these men's validity and no consent of the will in rejecting them, then something's wrong. If you believe someone to be an impostor, impersonating someone in a position of authority, you have neither knowledge that he is the man you must obey, nor consent of the will involved in deciding to disobey him or his agents. Here's an example. Pedophiles impersonate ice cream men often enough that some states actually have specific laws against pedophiles filing for ice cream truck permits or participating in ice cream truck vending. Here's an example from Massachusetts general laws. It's in Part 4, Title 1, Chapter 265, Section 48, Ice Cream Truck Vending by Sex Offender Prohibited. A sex offender as defined by Section 178C of Chapter 6 who engages in ice cream truck vending as defined in Section 25 of Chapter 270 shall be punished by imprisonment in the House of Correction for not more than 2.5 years or by a fine of $1,000, or by both such fine and imprisonment. Hey, wait a minute. Speaking of pedos and ice cream. Well, I guess I know what part 3 is going to be about.